Hello, dear listeners. This is your host, John Consemulder for Healing Sound Movement Radio. And tonight's guest is, a bit of a personal honor and a privilege. And I know a little bit of his work for many years now, but it was quite a coincidence, or maybe I have to call it synchronicity, that I got an email stating that there was, I believe, the 28th conference of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. That's IASD, and the website, I believe, is www.asdreams.org, so ASDREAMS.org. And one of the keynote speakers is Professor Dr. Stanley Krippner, and I believe he's already holding the line, but I'm going to mention a little bit of his bio because it's interesting for the general listeners. But to state this directly, the website of Stanley Krippner, with a lot of information and important stuff on there, is www.stanleykrippner.com, and that's PPNER.com. So Stanley Krippner, PhD, is a professor doctor. He's a professor of psychology at the Saybrook Graduate School and Research Center in San Francisco, California. He was the director of the Dream Laboratory, Maimonides, I hope I'm pronouncing it right,
Maimonides, yes, you are.
Good, Maimonides Medical Center, and I've heard of this important study and facility from my friend Professor Dr. Hans Gedding and Dr. Hein van Dongen, both working as researchers, of course, at the Parapsychological Institute in Utrecht, where I lived for many times while I was trying to become a neuropsychologist. So this is quite a famous facility. So the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, but also of the Child Study Center, Kent State University. He is a charter member of both the International Society for the Study of Dissociation. That's interesting because that was my study as a neuropsychologist. We'll talk about this in a minute. And the American Creativity Association, and he's past president of APA's Division 30, Psychological Hypnosis, and 32, Humanistic Psychology, but also the Association for the Study of Dreams, the Parapsychological Association. That reminds me of our last talk with Stephen Browdy, and the Association for Humanistic Psychology. He's co-editor of several books, including Broken Images, Broken Selves, Dissociative Narratives in Clinical Practice, and he's editor of Dreamtime and Dreamwork. During his career, he has received many awards, including the Pathfinder Award from the Association for Humanistic Psychology in 1998. Now, this is a bio from the book I'm reading here. I bought this one a few years ago, so it's a very nice synchronicity that now I have the honor to talk with the guest and the co-editor of this book, Varieties of Anomalous Experience. But first, let me welcome Stanley to this show so we can talk about the new bio, probably some more. So, Stanley, welcome to this Healing Sound Movement Radio special about your work.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the elegant introduction.
Well, it was elegant, but I saw on your website there's also some new information. Of course, the things I said were probably correct, but I also see that, and I think it's important to mention, that you are co-author of Extraordinary Dreams, but also The Mythic Path, 3rd edition, Energy Psychology Press, and Haunted by Combat, Understanding PTSD in War Veterans, and co-editor of Healing Tales, Healing Stories, and the Psychological Impact of War on Civilians. So, well, it's an honor and a pleasure, and let me state that the first thing I did when I found out I was going to talk to you is look at the book I had, which is Varieties of Anomalous Experience. Maybe it would be a good start to start talking from this perspective, from anomalous healing experiences. Would you agree that what we call anomalous really depends if we look at it from an experience level or from a biomedical level or from a, for instance, shamanic level or alternate state of consciousness level? What we call anomalous, it really depends on what kind of theory, and if the theory is correct to reflect reality in a way. To call it anomalous in the first place?
Well, of course, you are right. When we say something is anomalous, we mean that it's puzzling. It doesn't fit into a certain framework. Now, in our book, The Varieties of Anomalous Experience, we talk about, for example, out-of-body experiences and past life experiences. These do not fit into Western science's framework of what is possible. However, let's say that we're going to go to a monastery where there are some Tibetan monks, and they would say, oh no, we have past life experiences all the time, and sometimes when we meditate we go out of our body, so these would not be anomalous in that particular society. So you're right, it depends upon the culture you're in, it depends upon the people you are talking to, whether or not the word anomalous or puzzling can really apply. Also, you note that in the title we use the English word experience. We're not talking about events here, things that can be validated, things that can be demonstrated experimentally, things that science can pin down. No, that's another issue. That's another book. We're talking here about people's reports. People report some very strange experiences that don't seem to fit in to what Western culture's science thinks is possible.
Now, I talked to Professor Dr. Stephen Browdy. You probably know him as well.
Yes.
I believe he's also past president of the Parapsychological Association, if I'm correct. And
Yes.
And he has this important magazine. What's the title again? The Journal of. I lost the name, but I believe he's the editor of that journal. But he's also talking about the importance of experience, because in a way he was flabbergasted not just by the parapsychological research and all the facts and all the proof, and let's call it evidence. Proof is a different kind of looking at things, but all the evidence from parapsychology. But he told me on a personal level, he told me, you know what, John, what baffled me the most were actually not the proof and the evidence in the laboratory, but those experiences people were having outside the laboratory. He thought those experiences were maybe the strongest indirect evidence for parapsychological phenomena. Do you agree?
Well, it depends on what you consider evidence.
Yes.
You know, each person, especially in the world of science, has their own standards of what they would consider evidence. And for mainstream science, the experiences really don't count for anything. It's what happens in the laboratory under controlled conditions that amount to evidence. And so experience is discounted. That's why in our book, we do focus on experience and let the readers of the book judge for themselves. We present a whole host of experiences on, shall we say, lucid dreaming. Now, lucid dreaming is the type of dream you have when you're awake and aware during your dream. When I was in college, scientists were denying that this could possibly happen. But now that has occurred in the laboratory. It's been demonstrated. It's been validated. And so here's an anomalous experience that is still strange and unusual, but it's also an event. It's actually what we call a veridical event, something that you can pin down. But then on the other hand, there are strange experiences like abduction experiences where people claim they've been kidnapped by an unidentified flying object.
Mm-hmm.
No, we have not validated that in a laboratory. But we have a lot of experiences that people have reported, and interestingly enough, by and large, those people score within the average range on tests of mental health, so they're not crazy, they're not schizophrenic, they're not, and you could say, well, maybe they're making it up. Well, many of them could be making that up, but there are other people who, again, don't really seem to be liars. So this is really an anomaly. One has to come up with other explanations for this type of experience, which we do in our book. We talk about psychological experiences, that the abduction might happen in their dreams or as they're waking up. And of course, there's the outside chance that they actually are abducted. We discuss all of those possibilities. But the point is, the abduction experiences have not been pinned down in the laboratory, so we cannot say they are events. They're basically experiences. Now, and Stephen Braude says that he feels that for him, the experiential reports about parapsychological experiences are the strongest. Again, yes, that's his judgment. And you match that with his colleagues at the university, I think many of them would disagree with him. but, you know, they have the right to their standards of evidence. He has the right to have his standards of evidence.
Sure, and I believe his standard was a personal one at that level, as evidence for him, not as a scientist or philosopher, which he is, but on a personal level, like John, that blew me away. I knew something was going on, and I wanted to know more about the phenomena. And of course, I tried to study it with high philosophical standards and high regular scientific methodology and science and statistics, so all the regular science stuff going on. But his first impression was, this is so powerful, this is so strong, and he got attracted by that research field, so to speak. Well, I think it's quite interesting and maybe also a little bit synchronistic that you mentioned the OBE in the beginning, the out-of-body experience and past lives, and also dissociation came in, and now this reminds me what you just said. Remind me of a conference we did with Dr. Paul LaViolette about free energy and anti-gravity. He actually explained the ether physics, allowing, in a way, the possibility of anti-gravity, because in the model of Einstein and Newton, both models do not even allow the possibility that anti-gravity could be a reality, not even in the theoretical physics, let alone in reality itself if we would witness a UFO. So I think it's interesting. And our next guest as Healing Sound Movement events, because we also do events in Amsterdam, is Raymond Moody, and of course you know him as well. So I think it's interesting that we have here a UFO abduction kind of experience and an OBE and past lives. Now, you are specialized also in consciousness, in dreams, and maybe also the global consciousness or unconscious, things like Jung described. Could, in a way, the abduction scenario, the experience, be a phenomenon, and not because someone's crazy or fantasy prone, but non-local consciousness kicking in? Because I think that's so interesting in all the parapsychological phenomena. You might say it's an out-of-body experience. You might say it's a near-death experience, that you see yourself from another perspective and you see the doctors trying to save your life. But does it mean you are, in a way, you have just passed on, but you look from the tunnel in the light to your own body? Or do we have just an out-of-body experience? Or is it more kind of telepathy kind of thing, or a non-local consciousness? So what does it mean if we look at out-of-body experiences and past lives and dissociation, and we try to make a relationship with the abduction experience? Might the abduction experience also be very much related to our consciousness and the non-local consciousness we seem to have, the infinite consciousness possibilities as human beings?
I think that some of your listeners might be wondering what we mean by non-local consciousness, and I suppose the easiest way to explain that is that we can be aware of things that are not in our immediate vicinity and that are not obtained by our ordinary senses. Now, it's similar to turning on television and watching something. Well, that's something that is non-local, that's something that's not here, but there are mechanisms to explain television reception. There is not something that we know of in the human body or the human brain to explain information that some people claim to get from their dreams about something happening several hundred kilometers away. So that's why we call that type of consciousness non-local. It can't be explained by the ordinary senses or what we can immediately perceive locally. In other words, something that's right around our vicinity. So now let's go back to the notion of the collective unconscious. If such a collective unconscious exists, and again, this is proposed by a number of very profound thinkers in philosophy and even in psychology, and opposed by, shall we say, an even larger and greater number of Western scientists and philosophers. Well, yes, the collective unconscious would explain a lot, because that's the repository not only of human experiences but of human imagination. And what Carl Jung called archetypes, what the shamans around the world I visited called the spirit world. And once you admit to the possibility of non-local consciousness, then you have sort of a framework that would account for many of these anomalous experiences.
Interesting, because now you mentioned the shamans, and I always look upon shamans as let's call it the witch doctors from the past, but also the future alchemists, as new science is now proving that they probably were right. They were probably tapping into the Akashic records or whatever, and sometimes they use ritual or symbolism or visualization to achieve that contact with a higher realm, so to speak, in a multidimensional reality, we might say. But I'm very curious, because you met, if I read your work, you've met a lot of shamans and a lot of ancient researchers, I would almost say, of non-local and infinite consciousness, which a shaman in a way is. And I thought it was interesting. There was this movie documentary, I believe it's called Something Unknown. I interviewed that producer, Renee Scheltema, and she interviewed people like Roger Nelson and Dean Radin and so on. And there was one sentence which I thought was very interesting, and it just pops up in mind now, because I know you've worked a lot with shamans, and I would love to talk to you about your experiences. One of those shaman people just basically told her, like, non-local consciousness, to try to explain how important that was, this new field of science. And that shaman basically laughed, because he explained that is like air to us. So they don't even get that concept, because it's so normal to them. And I thought that was so very interesting, because they didn't talk about the concept, they just used it as prana, so to speak. It was normal to them, like just breathing air.
Well, once again, the world of the shaman is very different than the world of the ordinary man or woman in Western society, because shamans believe that they can extend their consciousness into time and space, visiting the spirit world. And sometimes they do come back with information which is quite unique and quite important. One of the shamans I visited was Credo Mutwa, who's a Zulu shaman living in South Africa. And I visited him in 1980. And during a drumming ceremony to welcome the new decade, he predicted that Nelson Mandela would be out of jail within the new decade, and that apartheid would no longer operate within the coming decade. And I thought that was a little bit of wishful thinking, but nevertheless, both of his predictions did come true. Now, shamans work very hard on behalf of the people that they serve, especially their community. And I have visited shamans in different parts of the world and have been impressed by their knowledge, especially their knowledge about medicinal plants and herbs. And this knowledge is very, very precious and very, very useful to the people around them. I think that shamans played a very important part in human evolution, because many of the rituals and ceremonies that they managed really didn't have a direct effect upon human health, but the sick person believed that they did. And if you believe in something strongly enough when it comes to health, the placebo effect kicks in, and you can get better or you can get completely well. Now, what about the people who were not able to evoke the placebo response, who were not able to get their immune system to work on their behalf and the other self-healing capacities? Well, those people died off, and their genes dropped out of the gene pool. They didn't pass them on to their descendants. So as a result, as a heritage from our evolutionary past, we have this wonderful placebo effect. We have faith and hope that help us to get well if we will believe in the medicine that's being offered us, or the prayer that's being offered for us, or the ritual that's being done on our behalf. And all of these can be triggers to self-healing. And so even in this modern day and age, there is a leftover human capacity from literally tens of thousands of years ago, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, where the shamans played a very, very essential role in preserving a trait which now we can find all over the world, even in this contemporary century.
So the placebo effect and the power of suggestion and belief might be an inbuilt capacity, and which has now become a kind of a hidden potential, which we could tap into in maybe in 10,000 years ago in a better way, a more direct way than we do now. It's a kind of a hidden potential built into our genes, which probably was made some use as a survival mechanism back in the day, so to speak?
Oh yes, it was adaptive. That's why it survived in the evolution of the human species. And we're making direct use of it today. In fact, if a person is given a sugar pill and told, this has no medicinal value, but it will trigger your inner healing capacities, so take it and believe in it. Even if a person knows it's placebo, most people will still respond favorably to it. So this suggestibility that we all have can be very, very helpful in healing. It can be helpful directly in cases of hypnosis, for example. Also, faith healers use this to evoke a person's inbuilt healing response. There's many, many ways that self-healing can be very, very important in a person's recovery from disease or in the prevention of disease. And again, this all goes back to what shamans did a long time ago, and they're still doing. There are active shamans in many parts of the world, and now they're finally getting some respect. There are shamans in Siberia and Mongolia and Latin America, Native Americans in the United States and Canada. There's many shamans in Europe, especially the Lap shamans in Finland. And I even know of shamans who have visited the Netherlands and have had appreciative audiences.
Okay, now what I think is so interesting I have to see page 372 in your book, which you co-edited, Varieties of Anomalous Experience. We just talked about this. There's this info about the placebo, and I wrote it down because it felt as such an important crux, so to speak, and a relationship to other important information. Schouten, this researcher, he says, and I'll quote him here, "There's not much to be gained by calling the results of complementary treatment just placebo or suggestion. This would merely mean replacing one term," and I think this is very important, replacing one term with another, and would contribute little to the explanation of the phenomenon. Now, why I think it's so important? Well, why I did my when I did my study with dissociation, with the field of DID, so dissociative identity disorder, and before before that, they called it multiple personality disorder. But I did it at the University of Utrecht when I became a neuropsychologist. And I found out that the more I got into the field of psychoneuroimmunology and mind over matter and psychokinesis, so to speak, and because I think they're related, parapsychology, magic, and new science are in a way related in this field of psychoneuroimmunology. And when I told my professor back then that I thought that the biofeedback and the suggestion and hypnosis and conditioning and biofeedback were the most important things to look at because they might lead to an explanation of that self-healing mechanism, which I think is the most important in everything in healing. He said, well, you know what, it's just suggestion. And I looked at him and I said, I didn't get the concept because I thought he was joking, but he was dead serious. So his regular scientific approach just blocked him by accepting that that might be the key to non-local consciousness, to hypnosis, to shamanic communication with, or maybe identification with higher realms or the gods, whatever, and spirits, whatever we want to call it. And I said to him, well, no, this is not just magic, not just parapsychological phenomena. This is basic science. Psychoneuroimmunology is leading to the important fact, I think, and I want to ask you to respond on this, that this remark that this Schouten researcher made, that it's very important, don't call it just placebo or suggestion like he did, because suggestion and placebo are the most important things to study and to research, because it might lead to a final explanation for the mechanism of that important self-healing mechanism that goes on in the body, and which you can facilitate with impressions, with intentions, visualizations, or even manipulations from another person or a group who prays aimed at your direction, so to speak. So would you agree that this might lead to a new field and a new understanding of that vague concept of, but so important concept of self-healing?
Well, I really think so. The professor that you talked to used the term that's just suggestion. Well, again, that's using a very vague term to describe something that we can be much more specific about. The whole field of psychoneuroimmunology has really opened up a search for the inner mechanisms of placebo, of suggestion, and the way that the neurotransmitters, the messengers of the nervous system, can very quickly send messages that will evoke a healing response from the immune system, from the T cells, from the killer cells, from all of those antibodies that help us to stay well, to recover from disease. So we're finally starting to pin this down and understand it better. Now, something like biofeedback or neurofeedback has been around for years. We're beginning to understand a little better the mechanisms involved there, where a person can lower one's blood pressure, can regulate one's brain waves and one's heart rate through a machine that flashes lights to tell them when the blood pressure is too high or when their brain waves are out of control and they're too rapid, preventing them from relaxation. And then individuals can sense their own feeling tone and give themselves suggestions that will end up lowering the blood pressure or helping to evoke relaxation. Now, you mentioned your work with dissociative identity disorder, and of course this ties in very, very neatly with our discussion, because in cases of DID, it's not uncommon for an individual to switch from one identity to another, and sometimes one identity will be nearsighted and one identity will be farsighted. Mm-hmm. Or one identity will love eating strawberries while another identity will be allergic to strawberries. Now, these are physical responses that can be measured and can be observed, and the switch between alters can happen within a few minutes.
Yes.
So, if the body has that capacity to unconsciously make those changes, it certainly has the capacity to consciously make major changes that can proceed to heal somebody or to help preserve somebody's health. So I think the study of DID is extremely practical, extremely important in terms of what it can yield about the body's self-healing mechanisms. By the way, I am a friend of a woman who was the subject of the book Three Faces of Eve, and her name is actually Chris. And Chris went through 21 different personalities before she merged them all. And it was very hard for her, very rough for her, but eventually she was able to come out of it in good shape. And one of the most interesting things was that she started to do some artwork while she was having these dissociative problems. And one identity would compete with another identity in terms of who could do the better painting. Well, once she had the merging and the healing, all of this talent came together, and now she does lovely paintings that she sells at auctions and gives all the proceeds to mental health organizations. So something very positive came out of this ordeal for her, and she does a lot of good work with mental health organizations and has raised a lot of money for them with her paintings.
Wow. Now, I just read in your book relating to this, I think it's important to also discuss this, that there's a comment in your own book by, I believe, Peter and Price Williams say that in fact some social scientists have claimed that such altered states as spirit possession and out-of-body experience, they talk about this here, can be therapeutic. Indeed, there is an anthropological literature indicating that these altered states can be socially adaptive and empowering, especially in the case of female healers. So in a way, we're not talking about psychiatric disturbances here, but it's even therapeutic. And I thought it was interesting because we did 5 patients, and of course we sometimes joke that we had about like 100 because they can have that much identities. But we have 4 to 5 patients back then in my research, which was 1997 at the University of Utrecht, and we did memory tests, but we also did psychophysiological measurements. And to tell you the truth, I was flabbergasted when I basically saw a woman and I looked at her back and her neck, and all of a sudden I wanted to ask her something to go to the next phase of the research. I saw her neck becoming thicker and became wide and I literally saw her transform into a man. Well, at least I thought something is changing. It's like a special effect in a movie, but this was real. And it was because there was a trigger word which went wrong, so to speak. So all of a sudden, this woman changed into a man identity. She had to put down her glasses. She had a different voice. And at that time, I didn't know what to do because, and luckily the psychiatrist, Onno van der Hart, you probably know him. He was the psychiatrist facilitating the research as well. And he made sure that the other alter came back to the front, so to speak, and the new one just had to go to the background. But it happened again later when something went wrong, and this person even prophesied this in a way because she said, you know what, it might go wrong because sometimes machines react strange to my consciousness. And I thought, yeah, right. Back then I thought, yeah, right. But in a way I knew this could happen. And it did happen. And when this sound came in too loud on her headphones, the other alter came through, which was a child. And I will never forget this because I looked at that child, and the way that child looked at me, well, Meryl Streep couldn't even have acted this perfectly because that child was startled and she was afraid and she looked at me like, where the am I and who are you? And then she realized she was attached to all those wires because she wanted to move around, and she put down her glasses because of course this little child had no bad eyes, had good eyes. So when I thought of all this later, I realized that unity of mind is, well, dissociation is such a powerful way, like you said, proving that if we can do this on an unconscious level, just imagine what we can tap into on a conscious level, because this person changed from a woman to a man and later became a little child, and I literally could only see that little child. So as if she literally stepped back into her body when she was like 6 or 7. So I will never forget that.
Well, that's quite dramatic, and this is the type of thing one runs into when one works with DID people. And again, all of this is happening unconsciously. Just think what could happen if we got conscious control over these physiological changes that we could induce in our body when we get sick or when we get diseased with something or another. And I think these skills are certainly identifiable and they are teachable. One of my colleagues at Saybrook University, where I teach, actually did a study with imagination with cancer patients and had people imagine what their cancer cells looked like. And the people who imagined that the cancer cells were horrible monsters or dragons or something aggressive like that were the ones who died very quickly. The ones who identified their cancer cells as mud or slime or dirt, they recovered more quickly. But there was another part of the story, too. People were told to imagine their immune system and the parts of their body that was fighting the cancer. The people who died said the immune system was like white clouds. That the people who survived were the ones who imagined that their immune system were like warriors or knights in armor or soldiers who were going around cleaning up the slime and killing off the cancer cells. So it's remarkable how we can imagine ourselves into sickness, but we can also imagine ourselves into health.
Yeah, from the placebo effect to the nocebo effect, because that's the other way around. I saw one person at Oprah many years ago, and I wanted to switch channels because, well, at that time I didn't thought it was interesting. There was this guy, and he didn't look too good, but I didn't know he was talking about. And then he basically, dropped that thing to the crowd and to Oprah, and I was amazed as well. He was dying from AIDS. But his thing was, which he just told the audience at Oprah, and also me at that time, that he wasn't actually dying from AIDS because he had just found out he had been misdiagnosed. But this guy was dying. Everybody could tell. He was talking about that. He had AIDS. But the problem was he didn't have AIDS, and he told his story to show how powerful convictions and the power of belief, like Bruce Lipton and so on, and psychoneuroimmunology comes in. So his thought and his labeling, like a stigmata, like, well, sir, I'm sorry, but you have 3 months to live and you're going to die. Well, that was something he inserted as a software message to his hardware, being the machine and the body, so to speak, like a bioenergetic message, like you are going to die, and his body just followed that message. Isn't that amazing if we can turn that around as a healing mechanism? Yes.
Well, it certainly is. And of course, this is similar to what is called voodoo death, where in a native village, a sorcerer will tell somebody that they're going to die. This is punishment for some transgression, and will do a ceremony that dooms the person. And sure enough, a few months later, they're dead. Now, nobody has poisoned them. Nobody has shot an arrow into them. But the statement of an authoritative figure, whether it is a sorcerer on the one hand or a physician on the other hand, can be a death sentence for a person who is highly suggestible.
That's why I also think that this field is so important. And I want to state clearly here that I'm into the, let's call it the white magic and the non-local consciousness and the healing, because I want to bring out material and information for a better world. But I think it's fascinating. I talked to James Hurtak and Uri Geller and Roger Nelson, and it's all went down at Stanford Research Institute and Princeton around 73 with the remote viewing and the psychic spies. And the funny thing is, there's now this movie. I'm not sure if you saw it, but I think you would like it, with George Clooney, The Men Who Stare at Ghosts, where you actually have a funny impression, but with real things, messages inserted into that movie's message. I think that the military, of course, is also, and intelligence agencies are also interested, because if you can read minds, well, maybe you can insert a message in a mind as well, like you just said, those voodoo deaths. So in a way, this is turning around the mechanisms of white magic and using it as super weapon technology in a way. And Russell Targ, of course, this is research, and I saw that for the first time last year at a conference with James Hurtak, who was together with Rupert Sheldrake. He was also on my show the other day, and I saw the real images of Uri Geller in 1973, and I saw what he could do with his mind, so his PK, psychokinesis stuff, and it was literally mind-blowing. It was not just bending spoons, but he was, of course, this is sensitive stuff if you want to disrupt machines, or you want to read what's in a hidden vault, or want to see like those psychic spies did, and Ingo Swann, for instance, did, and Pat Price did, with remote viewing. So do you know if this research is still going on, or is it now more being used? Because I think that the mechanisms are very important and this research is very important, but of course I would love to see the implications of this important research to go to implications for a better world and healing, of course.
Oh, yes, so would I. Now, it's interesting to bring up the movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, because that is actually based on a secret military operation that was done in the United States many years ago. And the George Clooney character is actually based on Colonel John Alexander, who is a friend of mine. And we discussed the movie, and we both thought that the movie could have been much better had they stuck a little bit more closely to the facts and not embroidered it with a lot of things that really didn't happen. Nevertheless, it's an entertaining movie, and if you don't take it literally, you can go out and you can enjoy it. And I don't know if such things are still going on or not. Back in those days, there were some remarkable feats done with remote viewing and non-local consciousness, but the problem is that they were sort of unpredictable. One couldn't really get a handle on it. One really couldn't get a good control on it. And conventional spying was much more dependable. So it was a worthwhile try, and I don't know if we'll ever know just exactly what came out of it. And for all I know, it might still be going on in some part of the world or another. But much more important is what we can pin down and what we can use, and that is the body's defense mechanisms and the body's healing mechanisms. There we can get evidence in a laboratory. There we can actually intervene to save people's lives. And so this is the area that I think is well worth cultivating, well worth doing research on, and I think it's ready for application. Biofeedback is one application, neurofeedback is one application, visualization is one application, hypnosis is another application. All of these technologies help people to get in touch with their own ability to take an active role in their own healing and their own health.
Now, Rupert Sheldrake would say this smells like the sense of being stared at, and of course he also has his book, The Dogs Who Know That They Are, or The Pets That Know That Their Owners Gets Home. So maybe we have to recall, give it a new title, that movie, The Men Who Stare at Their Immune System, because that would be a good way to start a new movie. Well, I'm joking here, but of course this is reality, and your story about your colleague with this cancer research using visualization and so on. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I did a literature study in around 1996 of the psychoneuroimmunology field, and there was one study where, in a way, the people had to visualize. They were treated cancer patients. They had to visualize that the cancer cells were, in a way, bad cells. I think the visualization would have worked better if they would say that the whole field of bioenergetics in the body is coherent and is lovely white light, and it's overwhelming the other cells which become positive. Also, I think that's a better approach, but they did it like this. People had to visualize as if the cells, the bad cells, were targeted like Pac-Man kind of things, which is the immune system. But the amazing thing to me is that statistically significant, there was this scientific evidence, well, let's not call it proof here, but evidence that these people got more natural killer cells in their immune system. So I thought this was like a new kind of magic research field, literally, because that meant that with our minds, with our consciousness, with our intention, and also think of the work of Lynn McTaggart, of course, intention research, that we can, in a way, control and steer physical, at least biochemical and maybe biophysical and non-local, because this works on a non-local level. You work with your mind. We can steer and engineer and manipulate in a good way our immune system, or maybe our pH level, or maybe whatever kind of function in the body. But my question is, A, do you agree? I think the answer is yes. But B, what's your idea, if you have any, what the limit of this influence is? How do we know what kind of things we can change? Do we know? Do we still have to learn how it all works? Or has this all been done? And does it really depend how strongly we believe to put out this attention effect to have the best effects for whatever kind of biochemical or biophysical process in the body for self-healing?
Well, the study that you were just telling your listeners about was actually done by a cancer specialist by the name of Dr. Carl Simonton, and he really launched this field of using imagination, visualization, and imagery for cancer patients. And that was some 20 years ago, and we still don't know how effective it is, or the extent of it, or the limits of it. Now, like you say, it must have limits. It must be some type of limitation. Of course, there are some people who claim that the use of visualization and imagination is of no use whatsoever. And then there are people who say, well, yes, it's useful in certain cases, and you don't know how effective it's going to be unless you try it. I think what we can say is it's no substitute for regular cancer treatment, and also we can say that if you add this on to other cancer treatment, at least you're not going to do any harm, and you might actually do some good. But the whole point is that there really needs to be much more research, much more study on this topic. Candace Pert, P-E-R-T, is a pioneer. She's a friend of mine, and she's written widely on the topic of psychoneuroimmunology. And even years after she introduced this field, we don't have as much research, we don't have as many applications that I think are deserved. For one thing, it sort of offends people who are used to doing things in the old-fashioned way. And also, it requires people to work together. Sometimes you have to have people from several different fields. working together. And you not only need a physician, sometimes you need an art therapist or a psychotherapist to help out. Or you need to bring in somebody with hypnosis skills.
A multidisciplinary team, you mean, yeah.
That's right. And medicine is so expensive. I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but in the United States, the more people you have working with a patient, the more expensive it gets.
Yes. Now, you mentioned Candace Pert, and I think that's quite nice synchronicity as well, because I read about her work when I was doing this literature study back in 1996, and I thought it was amazing that after my study I got more into non-local kind of consciousness and electric phenomena, electromagnetic, and even biophotonic and bioholographic processes as maybe the real cellular communications and regulation going on within cells and between cells. And last year, I'm not sure where she wrote about it, but it was an introductory text to someone else's book. I don't think Bruce Lipton's book, but someone else's book. But Candace Pert, and I thought it was fascinating, wasn't just talking about biochemical things and neurotransmitters and neuropeptides. I mean, it's one thing taking this huge immune system or the endocrine system or the neuronal system and proving that they're not separate but they work holistically, but it's still biochemics and it's still locality, so to speak, in a body. But she also was attracted to another kind of theory where it's not just the biochemical action going on, how interactive and holistic still it is a local kind of biochemics and not biophysics, and not even non-local biophysics or information transfer at a distance. She was talking about electromagnetic signaling, like Jacques Benveniste with his digital biology kind of theory, and I thought that was fascinating. So leading researchers in the field of psychoneuroimmunology are like, well, maybe Tom Bearden or Robert Becker and those kind of researchers, and the Russian scientists who work with torsion fields and so on. Now also talking about cellular communication at a more non-local level. So again, this at a distance past time and space effect. And what's your idea of explaining cellular action and our physiology in this way, talking about electric signals and electromagnetic fields and so on?
Well, you certainly are very well versed on this topic, John. Candace Pert, by the way, has written an excellent book, Molecules of Emotion.
Yes.
And it's an older book, but I think many of your listeners might want to track it down because it is still full of very, very useful and very powerful information. Now, in answer to your last question, I think that medicine has yet to catch up with the work of the German researcher Franz Popp, P-O-P-P, and some of the work that the Russians have been doing for years with biophotons.
Like Gurvich.
Yes, that's right. The work that Kazanateyev has done in Russia and that Popp has done in Germany indicate that the body actually does send out photons of light, and these might have important implications for healing. The fewer biophotons that they send out, the weaker the body seems to be. Now, the work that Kazanateyev did many, many years ago has yet to be appreciated because he took some very basic plant material, say a cucumber and a cucumber root, and he separated the cucumber root, putting one in one test tube and one in another, and then he would put poison into the cucumber root in one test tube, and sometime later the cucumber root in the neighboring test tube started to die.
Well, they were both closed, right? They were both closed.
They were both closed, right. So there was no way that you can explain it except the photons that the dying cucumber sent out also made the healthy cucumber get sick. Now, this was done at fairly short distances, but we don't know how extensive this type of signaling can be. and at what point it becomes not only local but non-local.
Yes, and also I believe there was a major difference with the Kazakh experience with the microwave radiation, so to speak, and also the ultraviolet kind of radiation. But it differed if there was an in between a material in the form of glass or crystal. And crystal, of course, is in a way a semiconductor of electromagnetic and electric energies, right?
You're absolutely right. The container made a great deal of a difference, and crystal has special properties that made that especially useful.
Now, can we turn this effect around? I also talked, I think you find it interesting, by the way, not only did we do Dr. Paula Violet a few weeks ago and Raymond Moody in May, but in June, Dan Winter's coming, but July, Dr. Pyotr Garyaev is coming, and of course he's doing this wave genetics and the phantom DNA, which is related to the work of Pop and Gurvich and Kazakneyev and Trofimov, of course. It's all non-local information transfer and transformation from the one state to the other, so to speak. But could we say, because I think this would be a huge opportunity for healing, even working with an apparatus, could we also do it the other way around? So we have a disease culture, although it's closed, and conventional physics and biochemistry saying it's not possible to heal this because you're putting a healthy kind of cell culture beside it because they're both closed, they cannot transfer information. Well, not in your biochemical model. Then it's an anomaly. Here we have this anomalous experience again, but it's not an anomaly from a biophysical approach and an electromagnetic carrier wave and maybe also phase conjugation signals sending out that information at a distance. So could we use, to put it in simple terms for our listeners, could we use the same principle, the Kazakneyev-Dev experience, so to speak, actually healing, even with a closed bottle, so to speak, healing a culture which is poisoned or which is sick? Could we use this effect the other way around?
Why not? It certainly would be possible. Let's hope we could use it for healthy purposes. Now, you started out this interview talking about the Association for the Study of Dreams, ISD, and I want to remind your listeners that this program will be happening right in the Netherlands.
Yes.
On the 24th of June of this year in Roldock. And anybody can come who wants to pay the registration fee. And some of these interesting topics about lucid dreams and even non-local consciousness will be discussed by the dream experts and the sleep experts coming to the Netherlands for this meeting. I think there will be several hundred people there, and it will be a very exciting event for people in the Netherlands and the neighboring countries to take in, and they'll have quite an education in the few days of the conference.
Well, I think it's an amazing conference. I believe it's the 28th already, and it's IASD, International Association for the Study of Dreams, like you said, June 24 to 28, and it's in Kerkrade, that's the city in the Netherlands, and the website to go to, dear listeners, is www.asdreams, one word, asdreams.org, and a lot of keynote speakers and other speakers, and it's a fascinating conference. I could already see by the topics and the people who are going to talk. And I also want to add that if you like, but also if the organization likes and other speakers, there's some great news, because besides doing Healing Sound Movement events and radio and music, we also have a Healing Sound Movement TV program now on duurzaam24.tv, which is a regular TV. I mean, not just internet TV, but also, what's the word, glass fiber and cable. So we could reach maybe hundreds of thousands of people depending on how popular the show is going to be. So whatever we do now on Healing Sound Movement radio, also these topics on non-local consciousness and infinite consciousness and ESP and Psi-related stuff. So we could even cover the whole conference and maybe also do a TV interview with you when you are there, Stanley. I would like to ask if you would be interested in that as well, because now we do radio, but we might reach many thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people with important information coming from that conference.
Well, that would be a splendid idea, and there will be, of course, many, many other people that you'd be able to interview also. And bringing television into the conference would be something that would be extremely worthwhile, to share all of this news and all of this knowledge and all of this material about dreams with a larger audience.
Yes, and talking about dreams, you were the director of this important dream laboratory, the Maimonides Medical Center, and I learned, the first time I learned from this research was through the Parapsychological Institute in Utrecht, where I met Professor Dr. Hans Gedding. Then he was doctor, now he's Professor Dr. Hans Gedding. And I thought it was fascinating, but can you tell the general listeners what the main, well, it's a lot to cover, I know, but the main research was about and the main important findings that led to new insights in psychology and consciousness, this dream research?
Well, I know we don't have very much time left, but let me just give a quick summary.
Sure.
And then if you want to hear more about it, we can do this on television when you come to the conference.
Great, yes.
Yes, at our laboratory, we actually did the first controlled studies of anomalous dreams, where we would have somebody in a soundproof room hooked up to an electroencephalograph machine so we could monitor their brainwaves and their eye movements, and they would try to pick up information about an art print that was randomly selected and that was being viewed by somebody in another room or another building that they could have no physical contact with. In other words, this was an example of non-local consciousness. And we had neutral outside judges try to match the whole variety of dreams for many, many people with a whole variety of art prints. And 3 out of 4 times they succeeded, where you'd suspect that maybe 1 out of 2 times by chance they would succeed. And we did this research for 10 years. It's described in the book Dream Telepathy that Montague Ullman and I wrote, and we also wrote over 100 articles about it. And also I describe it in my latest book, an edited book called Debating Psychic Experience. So the work is going on actually in the United Kingdom right now. In the UK, there are some laboratories and some parapsychologists doing this work. But you see, the premise is that if a person has intention and sort of programs oneself to reach out and tap into another person's consciousness and what the other person is doing, one can introduce this material into one's dreams, along with the ordinary material that they dream about. They often can capture the material that another person is viewing and thinking or talking about. Let me just give you a concrete example, because we had a art print out of several dozen that could have been used, come up randomly, by a Dutch painter, Vermeer, his famous painting, The Wine Taster. And the person in the distant room was focusing on that during the night. And in the meantime, the dreamer had one dream about a man in a tall black hat, which you do find on there on the picture, and another dream about a woman who was drinking something, and you do have that in the painting. And then the third dream about some flowers, and you do have that in the background. Now, the dreams also contained much information about the dreamer's personal life, but the judges who were doing the evaluation and doing the matching were looking for elements where the dream matched the picture, and as I say, 3 out of 4 times they were able to do this pretty well. Now, other laboratories have tried this. Some have had very robust results, some have not. Some got absolutely pure chance results when they did this. So this type, here's a good example of where people's experiences are often more dramatic than what happens in a laboratory. Many people have recorded instances where they will have dreams about a loved one being in serious danger, and they will even describe the type of danger, an automobile accident, a sexual attack, a war combat wound, and they will have the dream at the same time that their loved one is actually going through such an experience. And if they have written it down and if they share it with somebody, then we know they're not making it up. We know that it's actually something that could well be the non-local consciousness we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to try to put something like that into a laboratory is difficult, where you don't have that emotional connection. But we did have the dreamer and the experimenter have dinner together, get to know each other before they were separated. And so there was an attempt to give them some sort of contact, some sort of emotional bonding before we proceeded with the experiment.
Yeah, like the two bottles which got too near, there might be information transfer, you mean, because of the proximity effect. Yes.
That's a nice analogy. Right.
Okay. Do you have time for a final question, by the way, or?
Yes, let's have one more question. Sure.
One more question. Okay. This is a deep one, but well, a deep one. The question is simple, but the answer might be a deep one. And you may decide, of course, how much you want to go into this, because I know a lot of people would love to talk about it, and some people think, well, that's too far out of this world, so to speak, in a literal sense. Might we say that in dreams sometimes we have contact with higher beings or spiritual beings or even extraterrestrials? Shamans, talk about spirit guides, or even star people like the Hopi prophecy. The Hopi also talk about star people. And I also heard a few authors and lecturers talk, well, in private in a way, and let's call it backstage, and we'll try to do it front stage now, about the possibility of remote viewing, and of course that the agencies thought it would also be interesting, and I believe Ingo Swann was one of them who actually had these experiences and describes it in his book even, that you can also remote view other life on other planets. Do you have any knowledge about this project or the people who did this research? And the question on the side, what's your view on life on other planets? Is it possible, at least theoretically?
Well, of course, theoretically it's possible. And if I were living on another planet, Earth would be the last place I would want to visit. With all of the warfare going on here, it wouldn't be safe. And so if there is life on other planets, if there are UFOs, I don't blame them for not landing. They'd be shot at, they'd be at great risk. And so I think they'd be better off visiting planets other than Earth. The Earth is also in such an ecological mess with all the pollution going on. It might put the aliens at great personal risk to get polluted if they come to our planet. Actually, one of my students at Saybrook, Thomas Stryker, did his dissertation on this, talking to people like Ingo Swann, who have done remote viewing and have projected their consciousness to other planets, and have sometimes come back with material that is quite valid. Some material is not, and some of these people were taken to planets by aliens outside of our solar system. Anyway, that's all coming out in his book, which will be published before the end of the year, on extraplanetary experience. This is a new type of experience that will also be an anomalous experience. Now, the interesting thing is that even though these experiences people had were extremely anomalous and very, very far out, on a test for mental health, these people were within the average range. They weren't obviously crazy or schizophrenic, and yet they reported these very unusual experiences. So here's at least a little bit of concrete data that we have that opens up a new area of investigation. Now, from my own experience, I think that the shamans I have talked to have done this so often, they would not consider it an anomalous experience. They regularly go to other worlds, the lower world, the upper world, the spirit world, whatever they might call it, and they go there and they talk to aliens, they talk to spirit guides, they talk to ancestors, but they do all of this for a purpose. They do this in order to heal people, to bring back advice, to help their communities. And so the shaman is not in a laboratory, is not trying to make a name for himself or herself. They're hardworking people who use whatever technology is at their command to help a community that is ailing, a family that is in conflict, or a person who is sick. And very often they get this help from outside sources and outside worlds. So I'll just give you one story about that, which is so interesting.
Sure.
And that is a shaman in Bali, in Indonesia, again a former Dutch colony. And this Balinese healer was called upon by spirit guides, and she was forbidden by her husband to learn about shamanism in her dreams because he was a respected businessman in the community. And then her son got sick, and the shaman in her dream, the shaman's spirit guide said, "I'm going to teach you how to get your son well, but then you simply have to learn how to become a shaman." Well, the husband reluctantly agreed. He said, "Just don't call yourself a shaman. Call yourself a Muslim healer. And all of the money that you earn will go to the local mosque." Well, she agreed to that. And so when I went to visit her, she was so busy that people had to take a number to see her, and she allowed me to sit and watch her work with people for 32 consecutive sessions.
Wow.
And she told me not only did the instructions come in her dreams, but they gave her a ring in her dream, and she was wearing the ring. She used that ring to heal people by pressing it on certain parts of the body. And it was a ring that is not typical of that part of Indonesia, and this impressed her husband very, very much. And I've talked with other shamans who have had instructions in their dreams. This is one of many, many ways that shamans learn. Some learn from elderly shamans, some learn from spirits that come to them during the day. Others learn from their dreams.
And maybe others learn from your books. No, I'm kidding here, but it's a direct experience, of course, which is very important. I think you said something very important because in a way, I'm thinking of all those yogis and rishis. Well, they don't do their magic tricks or their occult tricks because they just want to show off their ego, like, look what I can do, teleportation or levitation or whatever, telekinesis or telepathy or what kind of parapsychological phenomena whatsoever we are studying because we think it's interesting from a science or philosophy or consciousness perspective. They use it with meaning and with intent, and here cosmic evolution comes in and helping out humanity or maybe even other species. So it's so important, like I said in the beginning, this shaman woman who was not understanding the concept of non-local consciousness, of course, when asked, and she said, "Oh, do you mean that and that?" Well, that's like breathing for us. So it's not important to have these skills. It really depends what you do with it for a better world, right?
I think that's a very good note to end on. It's what you do with it that's important. And you can talk about all of these exotic experiences, but how are they going to help people live better lives, and how are they going to bring peace to our embattled world?
Exactly. Well, our other website besides healingsoundmovement.com is worldpeacechild.com. So I agree with you with that because the children are our future and we need to give them a better world, or at least leave this world a better place than as we found it. So that's one of my goals, carrying this message further, I think.
Well,
okay.
Congratulations, John. That's a very worthwhile goal, and I agree with you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your time and for your important information. Once again, this was our great talk with Stanley Krippner, and you can look upon his website, Stanley Krippner, P-N-E-R, stanleykrippner.com. Also, once again, go to www.asdreams.org. En voor de Dutch listeners, een waanzinnige conferentie van IASD, de International Association for the Study of Dreams, juni 24 tot 28 in Kerkrade. 28e conferentie, ongelofelijke sprekers, waaronder dus ook Stanley Krippner. So Stanley, once again, it was an honor and a privilege, and thank you for having this great talk, and I look forward to meeting you in the physical body. I know we are not our body, but at least I hope you have your body with you when you come to the Netherlands, and I would love to meet you there and talk some more, and also the other guests, and I'll make sure this conference gets promoted on a wide scale, because the topic, of course, is very important. So thank you.
Fine, it was a pleasure.
Okay, likewise. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, John.